Hey everybody, welcome back. In this episode, we're going to go over some mistakes or misconceptions around automation and bug bounty hunting. Some of the next videos, as we get into exploits and stuff like that, I'm going to try and throw in automation steps or CLI tools or stuff like that that could be used to possibly automate some of the stuff. So before I do that, we're going to go over some common misconceptions, mistakes, and maybe some examples of what I'm talking about when I talk about why they may be mistakes or why they may be misleading in some way or another. There's a lot of information out there about bug bounty automation. There's a lot of people that find a lot of success in it. There's a lot of people that don't. There's a lot of people that have opinions on it. I'm obviously one of those people, but this is just my opinion, and some of the ways that I'm going to talk about in this video and in future videos is some of the ways that I do things. Everyone is different. Find your niche and go for it. But these are some of the things that I would talk about using more. There's three misconceptions that we're going to talk about today. So the first one is going to be the cost of infrastructure versus like the cost of data. So what I mean by that is a lot of people have either a laptop, a desktop. Like most people don't have a server tower just sitting in their basement to host servers on. But nowadays, it's super cheap and super affordable to run a very large amount of automation on virtual infrastructure like a VPS or something like that. You have to be careful which company you use because some companies allow it, some people don't. But for instance, I use Digitalocean, but I know there's a few out there to use. And now to pull up kind of the first link here and really get into it, this is Digitalocean's pricing chart. And if you can see all the way on the right side here in this column is the dollars per month, right? So this, and obviously this is in USD for me, but this is going to basically tell you how many dollars a month it is to host these servers. Now I think for my automation, I mainly stick in one of these two brackets. When you're in these two brackets, you're spending anywhere from, $6 to $12 a month, plus, the little amount extra that adds in per hour. That really doesn't tack on all that much because I'm not just pouring in usage time, but basically for very, very low cost, you can basically have a server running all the time. This server can be running constantly, doing whatever you want it to do, constantly enumerating subdomains, endpoints, constantly trying to run exploits or anything like that, stuff we're going to talk about later. But this doesn't mean your computer has to be on all the time. This doesn't mean your internet or your network has to be taking the strain. This is all offloaded from you. You can be sleeping, your computer can be off, you can be playing video games, streaming Netflix, whatever you want to do, and this stuff runs totally on its own for very cheap. And if you think about it, if anything you run on these servers leads to you finding a bug, I mean, even a super, super, super low bug might be like $100 to $300 if it's like super low. That pretty much would cover the cost of running a lot of these servers per month. Like multiple of them, or like one huge one, I guess, if you wanted to go that route. But what I'm trying to say is just a little bit of success would afford you the amount of money to be able to afford covering some of these costs. And it would make it extremely easy for you to constantly have automation running. When I say cost of data, it's the same thing. I'm not going to show my account. I use AWS for data storage. Again, there's a lot of different options. But the cost to store very, very large amounts of data, whether they be domains or endpoints or technology stacks, status codes, whatever it may be, is very, very cheap on just about any platform. You don't have to throw it in a text file. You don't have to throw it all on a local hard drive. I know hard drives are also pretty cheap, but you don't even have to do that. You can have it all virtual, all up in the cloud so that you can access it anywhere. That would be my recommendation, but that's just me. But again, the cost of gathering the data automatically from a VPS server and the cost of holding the data anywhere in the cloud is ridiculously cheap versus what you'd make just popping one or two low bugs a month once you get to that point. The second misconception or mistake, I would call it, is using tools that you either don't know how to use or don't understand how they work and how to use them. In a couple examples of that, again, just not calling anyone out or anything like that, but there's a tool called Subjack. Obviously, as you can tell, it has 1.5k stars. Big time tool. But if you go back here, it hasn't been touched in 2 years. This is a tool that's trying to find subdomain takeovers, and anyone who kind of dabbles in the subdomain takeover space, things change constantly. So something that hasn't been touched for 2 years, especially these fingerprints that it's using to hunt. So these are the fingerprints it's using to go find CNAME takeovers. If you have any idea what subdomain takeovers is, this is what it's using to find CNAME subdomain takeovers. There's almost for sure either stuff that's out of date or stuff that's missing from here that could help you do that. But you wouldn't know that if all you're doing is downloading and running the tool. It probably still has up-to-date current information, and it may still find you something, it may do all that, but the new stuff that you're missing and the updates that you're missing may be the difference between you finding bugs and you not finding bugs, right? Because you may be part of a large group of people that is using this 2-year-old tool to find your CNAME takeovers, and you're wondering why you're not having as much success as other people, but other people are using up-to-date information or custom tooling that they made themselves that's current to date, which is why a lot of people, if you pay attention to the space, do encourage you to write your own scripts, write your own tools. Every once in a while you can use tools. There are some out there that just aren't worth rewriting. Again, for subdomain enumeration, stuff like that, there's so many super good tools out there that are constantly updated and are by far just cutting edge. There's no need to try and rewrite them. But stuff like this is different. And again, there's areas to go get this information. Like, for instance, can I take over XYZ as a repository where the issues are used to keep up-to-date information on subdomain takeovers, fingerprints to find them, how to actually take them over once you find them, and et cetera, et cetera. So if you were writing your own tool and writing your own fingerprinting software to basically go out and fingerprint these CNAMEs, this is still one of the many data sources out there that you could use to make sure your fingerprints are up to date, or your basically like list of things that are able to be taken over is up to date constantly. Another thing I'm going to talk about as far as using tools wrong and stuff like that is I know a lot of people like to try and hunt reflected cross-site scripting and stuff like that. And especially for cross-site scripting in general, the number one tool that a lot of people talk about is Dalfox. Dalfox is basically a command line tool that is used to basically automate hunting for cross-site scripting. You find URLs that have an equal sign in them that shows that they might have parameters in them, et cetera, et cetera. And you basically throw them into Dalfox and see what happens. Dalfox also does parameter mining, so if you want to, you can just throw all the URLs to Dalfox and see if it can mine parameters. Anyway, my point is, if you go look for blog posts on how to use Dalfox, 85 to 90% of them are going to say pull URLs, grep for an equal sign to find parameters, put that into Dalfox, win bounties. And 95% of people are doing that. But what a lot of people don't understand is that if you go through the usage here in Dalfox documentation, not only is there a lot of ways in here to make sure that you're only looking for what you need to look for. So if you're only using Dalfox to look for reflected cross-site scripting in URLs with parameters, that's great. But then you should turn off everything else so it runs as fast as possible. And I'm not going to go through how to do that. I'm just saying that it's possible. There's a lot of things that happen on the back end that you should turn off if you're only looking for, is this parameter a reflected XSS? Whereas if you just wanted to go through every URL and you don't really care about reflected XSS and you just want to shoot across the whole internet for blind cross-site scripting in every parameter you found, then as you can see here right at the top, actually, you can add your blind cross-site scripting URL and it'll do it for you. But again, you should turn off everything else so it rolls through URLs at lightning speed and just shoots your payloads into every parameter. You don't want to be farming for parameters. You don't want BAV analysis. You don't want any of that so that it sits for 20 minutes on each URL, or it's going to go slow. It's going to go very slow. It's not going to be efficient. It's probably going to break and stuff like that. You don't need to do that kind of stuff if that's what you're using the tool for. And then again, if you know that half the internet is looking for reflected cross-site scripting, then maybe you want to look into, the SXSS mode, the stored cross-site scripting mode, and maybe try and poke at post requests more than just shooting GET requests at everything that has parameters. It's stuff like that that will put you on the cutting edge and put any automation you write on the cutting edge of what other people are doing. Everyone is threading tools together. Everyone is following these Medium blog posts on how to do bug bounty hunting, but it's the cutting edge stuff, building your own tools, using them properly, using them correctly and efficiently, and trying to find things that people aren't maybe looking for as often that actually end up getting you ahead. Again, maybe you have cookies that you can use. Maybe there's custom payloads you want to use. If no one else is using your custom payload and you have a custom payload that you think will rock the internet for cross-site scripting hunting, then use it. That may be your cutting edge. Maybe in your time hunting manually, there's a certain polyglot you use that's super amazing for hunting cross-site scripting manually, and now you want to try and automate it. Great, do it. That could be your cutting edge. But not reading through the tools, not reading what they do, not paying attention to if they're updated and if they're even like still running correctly or running with up-to-date information is a big issue when I see a lot of people talking about automation and how to do automation and stuff like that. So as we go forward, keep that in mind. The tools I mentioned, we're going to try and dive more in depth to, but even when I do mention them in future videos, there's probably even more information to look into than we'll go over in the video. And kind of snowballing onto that when I talk about taking a different angle, again, the third issue I'm going to talk about is people only automating low-hanging fruit and nothing else. Whether we'll talk about it in a different video, but whether that means running nuclei scanner with all the default templates, or just pointing Dalfox at URLs and hoping you'll find something, or just taking any tool off GitHub that you've heard or that looks like it might do something and just stringing them together and hoping it works. That stuff doesn't lead to a whole lot of success. Again, like maybe you'll see a post here, there, something where it worked for someone, and if it did, great. But again, a lot of the people finding a lot of success are not just looking for the same low-hanging fruit that everyone else is. They're doing it in a certain way or doing it better than everybody else. Now, a few examples about that. The first one is something that some people that I talk to call JavaScript farming. Since almost every website is built on JavaScript nowadays, obviously it's not totally the case, but there's a lot of JavaScript floating around the internet, obviously. And there are a lot of people that all they do is gather every line of that JavaScript and look for information disclosure, new endpoints, API calls that they can then put into scanners to do cross-site scripting checks, SQL injection checks, open redirects, DOM XSS, whatever. These endpoints that are hidden in JavaScript that they're farming may be endpoints that not everyone else is automating because they didn't just come from a subdomain that they found, or they didn't just come from GAU, or didn't just come from something like that. So that's one of the ways to do it. The other ways is, again, Dalfox has the thing, and there's another cool tool called Arjuan that we'll go over. But another way of looking at it is either spidering websites or using tools to find hidden parameters, not just parameters that show up in your regular spider or in GAU or in, HTTP archives or whatever, but finding hidden parameters and endpoints that don't get hit as often by other things. Again, even if you're using some of the same scanning techniques as a bunch of other people out there using automation, if you're scanning parameters that were hidden and that are harder to find, that less people find or less people scan or no one scans, again, your likelihood of finding something goes up. Every time you're doing something that someone else isn't, your likelihood of finding something goes up. That's kind of the common trend in these videos, and I want to keep harping that. Even though the series is called Gamified Hacking, you don't have to play the game the same as everyone else does. Playing on your own, using your own build per se, and using your own strategy is actually the best way to play the game, believe it or not. And yes, it takes time to develop the strategy and learn the tools and learn the techniques, but developing your own strategy is the best way to play the game, hands down, because that alone gives you an edge. Another example of going above and beyond just basic low-hanging fruit scanning is what a lot of people call Cve farming, which is similar to JavaScript farming. Instead of farming JavaScript, you're farming CVEs. And there's a few different tools to do that. So what a lot of people use is this site called Cve Trends that takes, the top trending CVEs, and like I said, right now it's the past 24 hours. You can swap it to, 7 days or whatever. There's a bunch of different configuration you can show on here. to pull this. And obviously when you look at it, it shows you CVEs, their audience, their info, tweets, etc., etc. And you can scroll through this manually and look to see if there's any, POCs here. But there's a tool in this repo right here that I will link called just CVE that uses this CVE list from the CVE project and actually goes out to all the references and scans GitHub and regexes to see if it can find any proof of concepts. So it's possible, wink, that you could make automation that scrolls through this repo every time there's a new push to the main branch and looks for the POC of that new, whatever they just pushed. If someone pushed a new POC for a new CVE that's out there, you can find it and you can make a template for it in Nuclei or test for it yourself manually using curl if it's like a URL or whatever you want to do. But these CVEs, especially CVEs that come out for like popular software, one of the biggest advantages that you can do is stop scanning for CVEs found in 2010 and pay attention to new ones getting updated and new POCs coming out. And if you already have a bunch of data that we've talked about sitting on the back end, a bunch of domains and a bunch of endpoints and a bunch of stuff like that, if a new CVE comes out that says, oh, every Apache server does this, that, or the next thing if you send this URL to it, well, if you have hundreds of thousands of domains and all you have to do is see if that endpoint exists, and if that endpoint exists, here's the payload you throw it at, and boom, cross-site scripting or SSRF or whatever it may be, it takes 2 seconds to write up a Nuclei template or to just send curl requests to all of the domains that you already have stored from your automation for that new CVE POC that just came out to bug bounty targets and make reports. It's very simple. Another thing too that's interesting, and when this list is populated, part of it comes from this CVE list itself. So this is where the CVE information comes from, is this CVE project, CVE list. And then what this trickiest CVE repo does is, again, it spiders GitHub and the reference lists that are listed in the CVE project and looks to see if there's a POC there, and if there is, it puts it there. The other thing that's interesting, combining the Cve Trends page with this repo that tries to gather POCs for you, one interesting trick that I've seen a couple people do is there's a new tool called GoFetch that was just released and just kind of shot around Twitter for a while, and it's pretty new. And again, it was updated 10 days ago. And all it does is it scrapes this Cve Trends site, but it just gives you the CVE numbers. So I can do GoFetch for the day or GoFetch for the week to get the top 10 CVEs from either the last 24 hours or the last week. Super simple tool. That's all it does. Very easy. But who's to say that I can't write some automation that runs this every day, pulls these CVEs every day, and then goes and checks this trickiest repo for those CVE numbers and to check if there's either references with POCs in them or GitHub repos with POCs in them. And if there is, great. Perfect. New hot CVE of the day or new hot CVE of the week with a fresh proof of concept. And you have it notify you. You can build a template up in Nuclei or, again, just curl requests, however you want to do it, and you can start hunting. That kind of stuff is how you do automation properly, again, in my opinion. Those are the three things I kind of wanted to talk about today. We're going to build on it again in the future. We're going to go over Nuclei and Dalfox and subdomain takeovers and all this stuff that I hunt for, that I have a little bit of experience hunting for. I'm going to go over all that in more detail. I know I shot a lot of stuff out there, but just as we go forward, when there are automation tidbits in some of the exploitation videos, pay attention for these three mistakes, because these are three big mistakes that people fall into. The cost of infrastructure and the cost of data. Remember, all of this that we just talked about is not possible if you don't have any of the subdomains. You don't have any of the endpoints, right? And it's very cheap to gather them en masse and store them en masse, right? It's very cheap and very easy. That should be the step one, easiest part. Problem number two is using tools that are either outdated or we don't understand how to use properly, etc., right? And that's very easy to fix. Do your own research, watch videos, read, look at the source code of tooling, understand how they work. and write your own, maybe involving the tool, maybe rewrite the tool, however you want to do it. And then, of course, problem number 3 is, again, just searching for low-hanging fruit or just searching for the easy stuff and not putting in the little bit of extra work that may put you looking in an area where there's not a lot of people looking. Again, like sending post requests in Dalfox or the CVEs, hunting new CVEs, Javascript farming, whatever it may be, right? That's really all for today. If you've watched this point, thanks for watching. Again, new videos coming out soon. Thanks a lot, guys. Peace.